Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Nazir daf nun chet, and we began the 8th chapter of Nazir yesterday, and we introduced this concept. I guess we really introduced it, I think, even the day before, or maybe it was 2 days before that. This concept of uncertainty. You know, we have two Nazirs, and somebody sees that one of them became Tameh, but is not sure which one. The two Nazirim don't know for themselves and can't say anything. They're not arguing at all that they didn't become Tameh. So for all intents and purposes, they're acknowledging that one of them, in fact, became Tameh, but we don't know which one. And so as a result, effectively, our Mishnah said that we have to treat them each as if they might have been tameh. Now, the problem with that is that they can't shave their heads, as part of the purification ritual while they're a Nazir. So effectively, what that means is that at the end of their terms, and we're assuming that they both have similar terms, that they start their Nazirut on the same day and they're going to end their Nazirut on the same day. So what happens is on the day that they're supposed to end their Nazirut, they bring one set of korbanot for a Nazir tahor and one set of korbanot for a Nazir tameh, and they'll partner in both of them, and they'll agree between them that whichever one of them is the tameh is the one who's bringing the Nazir that's for tahor, the korbanot for a tameh Nazir, and whichever one of them is the tahor one, that's the one who's associated with the korbanot for Nazir tahor. So. And obviously, I should note that what happens is during the weeks, immediately, or when the person becomes tameh, we're talking about where they became tameh sometime in the middle of their Nazirut, or one of them became tameh during the middle of the Nazirut. So that person will immediately, both of them will effectively immediately engage in the Tahara process. They'll be sprinkled with the Para Aduma waters on day 3 and day 7. They'll go to the mikvah on day 7, and then they will effectively be tahor, but they will be missing the korbanot. And so then at the end of the Nazirut, they'll bring the korbanot that they couldn't bring because they would need to shave their head in connection with those korbanot, and they can't shave their head because maybe they're not actually the one that's tameh, maybe they're the one that's tahor. So that was the situation in our Mishnah. So we had, again, this uncertainty, and then 30 days later, so then both of them would effectively then immediately observe a new Nazirut period, because we're not sure which one of them was the Tameh one. So obviously whichever one was Tameh still would need to observe 30 days of Nazirut after bringing their korbanot. And so as a result, they would bring a second set of korbanot. They would bring a korban for a Nazir tahor at the end, and they would both presumably shave their heads, and they would then and they would agree that whoever was actually supposed to be the Nazir, or whoever was still the Nazir, because they were the one who was Tameh before, so now this new korbanot for a Nazir tahor would be for that person, because of course the last time they were bringing a korbanot, it would have been for them as a Nazir tameh, and now they could finally bring the Nazir tahor because they've gone through the purification process and they've recounted their days of Nazirut. The problem with all of this is that shaving one's head as required after Nazirut is apparently prohibited in other contexts, as it violates the prohibition of not rounding the corners of your head. That you can't lo sakifu pa'asor shrem, that you can't round out the corners of your head. So how do we deal with this? So no, Stan's not able to make it this morning, but we have Moshe on the line. So all right, so now we're going to pick up with the third line from the bottom of Nun Zayin Amabet, and we're going to consider whether, maybe there's a debate regarding the legality of shaving one's entire head rather than just the corners. And the idea being is that this Mishnah, our Mishnah, which says that these two people, after one of them was possibly tamei, and so after they bring the first set of korbanot, there's no problem with the first set of korbanot, because whether the person's tahor or the person's tamei, they need to shave all of the hair on their head in order to go through that process. The problem is
about hair.
What do they do without hair? The hair grows back. So the hair is going to grow back. So now the problem is that after that first 30-day period, after their first Nazirut period is over, and now they're both observing a new Nazirut, but only one of them is really a Nazir, but we don't know which one. Well, then that person is okay to shave, but the person who's not really a Nazir, the person who was a Nazir Tahor, who never became Tameh, and was successfully concluded his Nazirut 30 days ago, how is he allowed to shave all his hair? Now, one of the possibilities that we saw yesterday was that maybe the Tana of our Mishnah says that he can shave all his head, because when we have the prohibition of not shaving the corners, it's only if you shave just the corners, if you just shave the corners of your head, which is generally understood to be your peyut. And so as a result, it's only if you shave that's a problem. But if you were to shave all of your hair, every single bit of your hair, maybe that would be okay. So we gave an answer yesterday that maybe we're talking about a woman or a katan is one of them. But the bottom line is so where they don't have this prohibition. But the bottom line is that we're trying to see whether maybe we can provide a different approach that would allow our Mishnah to be consistent with both of the people shaving and nobody violating a Torah prohibition. So again, we pick up with Lema Hakafas Kol Rosh Tanaihi. Maybe we can say, so again, this is the third line from the end of Nun Zayin and Bet, second word on the line. So Lema Hakafas Kol Rosh Tanaihi. Maybe we could say that that really this is that this prohibition of whether that the prohibition of shaving one's payas is in fact covered, or it does in fact cover the potential shaving of one's entire head. Maybe that question is dependent on a machlokas among Tanaim, to Tana Rabbanan, because we learned in a brisa, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Rosho Ma Talmud Lomer, when the Torah says in connection with a mitzorah, that it says that an mitzorah, the pasuk says V'haya b'yom hashvi'i, it'll be on the seventh day. Yigalach es kol se'aro, he needs to shave all of his hair. Es rosho, he needs to shave his head. Ve'ez zikano, and his beard. Ve'ez gabos einav, and his eyebrows. Ve'ez kol se'aro yigalach, he has to shave all of his hair. So the question is, why do we need the detailed items in the list in this pasuk? And specifically, why do we need to say Rosho? We already said that you need to shave all of your hair. So according to the first brisa, because the Torah also prohibits the shaving of one's payas. So as a result, and as we turn to Nuncheram and Aleph, Yochol Af Mitzorah Kain, I might think that even a Mitzorah is subject to that prohibition, Talmud Lomer Rosho. So as a result, we also say Rosho. So that means that you cannot shave, that you're allowed to shave, that in fact you have to shave, the Mitzorah has to shave his entire head. And so that is Baraisa number one. V'tanya Idach, and we also have another brisa, Rosho, what Mal Talmud Lomer, again asking the exact same question but offering a different answer. Why is it that we have to say Rosho in that pasuk? Gabi Nazir, because when it says with respect to a Nazir, Ta'ar lo yavor al Rosho, a razor is not allowed to go over his head. Yachol af Nazir mitzorah kain. I might have thought that even a Nazir who's a mitzorah also is subject to this prohibition. And indeed, this prohibition also includes a positive commandment associated with it, because in addition to saying that ta'ar lo yavor al rosho, we have the same pasuk says kadosh yeh gadel hera sarosho, that he should affirmatively grow his hair, and so as a result, that it constitutes a positive commandment. And so as a result, I might have thought that in that situation, when you have a negative commandment against both a positive and a negative commandment, we would say that you can't shave your head. So Talmud Loma Rosho, the Torah says specifically Rosho in the context of Mitzorah to tell us that even a Nazir who's a Mitzorah needs to shave his entire head. So my lab Tanai. So doesn't this show that this is a debate? Now, of course, we have these two brises. The brises clearly do not explicitly show that there's this debate as to whether or not shaving one's entire head is problematic or not. But we can now try to align this these two brises with this viewpoint. So what's the how do we get to the machlokas? So Lamanda Amar Minazir. So the second brisa who says that the reason that we say Rosho is to tell us that we don't, that a Nazir is not is still allowed to shave his head if he's a Mitzorah and during the Mitzorah cleansing process. So Kasavar Hakafa Kol Harosh Loshma Hakafa. Well, the reason presumably that he didn't need to tell us about, according to that brisa, that he didn't need to tell us about the regular prohibition for an average Joe is because the regular prohibition for an average Joe is totally not relevant. Because what do you do when you shave as a Mitzorah? You shave your entire head. And so as a result, when you shave your entire head, that's not considered rounding of one's corners of one's head. And so as a result, there wouldn't be a prohibition according to that view. And the pasuk is coming to tell us that the commandment for a Mitzorah to shave his entire head and all of the hair on his body will override the prohibition and the positive commandment associated with the Nazir, which is prohibiting them to cut their hair. The idach, and what about the first brisa? The idach savar hakavas kol harosh shma hakafa. The first brisa thinks that the shaving your entire head does constitute rounding the corners, and therefore would violate the other Torah prohibition. And so as a result, the pasuk is coming to tell us that you are not allowed, that you are still allowed to shave the person's head when they're a Mitzorah, even though we have this general prohibition. And the Rush says it very nicely. If we take a look at the Rush, it's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Vikashya idach Rosho ma Talmud Lomer. So why did the person say Rosho? Man demuki la, and so that's the beginning of our Gemara. And man demuki la ben Nazirus savar hakafa kol harosh lo shma hakafa. That according to the first view, the person who says that you have to shave your entire head, that is not considered a violation. And hilkach lemitzorah greda lo itzrich, and therefore for a regular Mitzorah, we don't actually need to teach us anything. De'ain kan hakafa, and therefore, because there's no violation when one shaves one's entire head of the prohibition of hakafa. Umoki la ben Nazir, and so therefore Mitzorah, and therefore we have to say that the pasuk is talking about a Nazir who's a Mitzorah. De'ikalaf, because in the Nazir Mitzorah situation, there is a prohibition of shaving because a Nazir is not allowed to shave even his entire head. So while we have a general prohibition about shaving part of one's head, namely the corners of one's head in general, one shouldn't shave off one's entire side of their head, their sideburns. They shouldn't shave off the entire sideburns. But maybe shaving all of your head is okay, including your sideburns. But when you shave your head for a Nazir, even if you shave your entire head, that would be a problem. Delo ya'avor And so as a result, when we have a Mitzorah situation, and we say the word Rosho, it must be talking about a Nazir, because that's the one who's prohibited, because that person has the prohibition of lo yavor, you can't pass over a razor on your head. V'aseh, and he has the positive commandment of the gadol pera, that you have to grow out your hair. V'aseh, and now comes the positive commandment, the giluach mitzorah, of the requirement that the mitzorah shave his head, v'dachilu, and it ends up pushing off both the positive and negative commandments associated with a Nazir not shaving their head. So that's the possible explanation of the machlokas of the brises. And so as a result, maybe that's what is going on here. And so we see that according to this, one of the brises would say that shaving one's entire head is not called hakafa, and as a result, maybe our Mishnah is going according to that viewpoint. So Amar Rava says no. Actually, we can say that both brises really agree. And what do they say? Dekuli alma hakava kol harosh lo shma hakava. Maybe really everybody agrees that it doesn't constitute hakafa, and so as a result, that would also be potentially consistent with our Mishnah. The ki asakra. And now 1 second, well, what do they argue about? They argue about that when it comes to the fact that the pasuk says Rosho kagon shehikif uva sov kilach. The question is whether or not, if one were to round the rest of one's head first and then do the do you need to do the rest of one's hair? What happens? I'm sorry, let me start that again. So now what's the machlokas about? The machlokas is about what happens if you start by shaving off your payas. If you start by rounding your head, does that constitute a problem? Or does the fact that you will eventually shave all your head allow it to be okay? So according to the first opinion, who says that we needed to allow us well, let's take a look at it inside. So really, everybody agrees that the rounding of one's entire head, meaning the shaving of all of your hair, does not constitute rounding the corners. So what is the pasuk coming to tell us? That you first round your head and then you shave it all off. So kevan ilu galche bechad zimna lo mechayev, that maybe because if you would have shaved it all off at one time, you would not have been liable. So kihikiv ubasov kilach nami lo mechayev. So too, if in the end you shave first the corners and then the rest of your head, you're also not liable. So now the question is, and so as a result, maybe the machlokas is about whether or not that is true. So but the Gemara immediately challenges that. Umikasav krahachi, would the pasuk really say this? Meaning, if in fact there was going to be any difference between shaving your corners and then the rest of your head, well, v'hamar reish lakish, kol makom she'ata motzei aseh below saseh, whenever you find a positive commandment and a negative commandment, imat hayachol l'kayim es shneihem mutav. Well, if you're able to fulfill both of them, well then great, you should fulfill both of them. It's only v'im lav, and only if you're not able to, yavo aseh v'yidches lo saseh. That's when a positive commandment will override a negative commandment. And so as a result, if in fact shaving your entire head does not constitute a prohibition of shaving the corners of your head, well then you should be obligated to shave the rest of your head before shaving the corners. And that way you'll never violate the prohibition of shaving the corners. So so that we've rejected Rava's explanation. So now we come up with a second explanation, and that's the one we're going to stick with. So let's take a look and see how it plays out. So Ella dekuli alma hakafa kol harosh shma hakafa. Actually, it turns out that we're not going to be able to defend our Mishnah based on these brises, because we end up saying that that shaving your entire head does violate the prohibition of rounding the corners. Uman demokim lekra midche lo saseh v'aseh. So one of them says that it can override both the prohibition and the positive commandment. So lav grade. So 1 second. So uman demokim lekra midche lo saseh v'aseh. Well, 1 second. According to the author of the second brisa, who says that we can use the requirement of a Metzora to shave in order to override the positive and negative commandments against shaving that apply to a Nazir? How does he know that a positive commandment can override just a negative commandment alone? So lav greda minole. How does he know that a positive commandment can override just a negative commandment? Well, Yelef Megadilim. He learns that from the commandment associated with tzitzis. So to Amar Kra Losel Bashatnes, because the Sukkim say one after the other. First, it says that about tzitzis, and then it says in the next pasuk. First it says about shatnez in pasuk Yud Aleph, and then it says about in Parak Kaf Bet pasuk Yud Aleph of Dvarim. It says that you cannot wear shatnez. You're not allowed to wear wool and linen together. And then immediately thereafter, it says that you're not allowed, that you need to wear tzitzit. Vitanya, and we have a brisa that says, Lo tilbash shatnez, hagadilim ta'aselach mehen. That even though the Torah tells us that you can't wear shatnez, the Torah then says that you have to wear tzitzis to tell us that you can have tzitzis that are made from shatnez. That even if you have a woolen tzitzis garment, and then you attach to it linen strings, or vice versa, that is sufficient. That will work for the mitzvah of tzitzis, and you will not be violating the prohibition of shatnez. So that is how the opinion who says that that Rosho comes to tell us about a Nazir. That's how he knows that a positive commandment would override a simple negative commandment. Well, one second, what about the author of the first brisa who uses Rosho, Uman de Nafgalem Rosho, the one who learns that Rosho is what teaches us that a positive commandment can override just a simple negative commandment? My time alone, Nafgalem Gedilim. Why doesn't he learn that from tzitzis? So Amar Lach Ravahu Da'asa. Because he would tell you that why do we have this juxtaposition of tzitzis and shatnez? It's to tell us something that Rava taught us. The Rava Rami ksiv v'nasnu al tzitzis hakanaf min hakanaf sil tcheles. So what does it mean when it says that you should put on the tzitzis on the corner? It means min kanaf. It means that you have the material that your garment is made of. The main garment of your tzitzis is made of. That should be the same material that you use to make the fringes. Uksiv tsemra ufishtim yachtav. But one second, in the prior pasuk, when it talks about what shatnez is, it says that it's wool and linen together. Well, how could wool and linen be together in the next pasuk when it talks about tzitzis, if you're required to always use the same material in the fringe that you in the strings that you use in the garment itself? Well, the answer is ha ketzad samro fishtim potrin bein b'minan bein shelo b'minan. So the point is that the Torah is teaching us that there's a special exception, that although in general one needs to make sure that the strings of the tzitzis are the same material as the garment of the tzitzis, when it comes to wool and linen, wool and linen strings can satisfy garments made of any material. So sharminin, but when it comes to other materials that might be used as strings, the minan potrin, they can be used for the garments of the same material, but shaloba minan ain potrin. But when it comes to other materials, then they will not satisfy them. So that's the conclusion, and so that is why the author of the first brisa cannot learn from this juxtaposition the rule about a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Well, so now that we've dealt with that, so we got some more questions. So we're going to be going back and forth, questioning the authors of these two brisas and figuring out what they do with the various words. So v'hai tana demapik l'rosho l'lav greda. So according to the first brisa, where the word rosho is simply telling us about that the positive commandment of mitzora overrides the negative commandment of shaving one's head. Well, how do you know that a positive commandment will override a positive and a negative commandment? Well, 1 second. Nafgale mi zikano. So he'll learn it from, in particular in the case of mitzora. So he'll learn it from zikano. That the fact that not only did the pasuk say in connection with mitzora, did it say rosho, but it says rosho and zikano. So why did it need to say both? So did Tanya zikano? What does zikano teach us? Matal malomer. What does it teach us? Lafisha ne'amar ufaz zikanam lo galehu. When it comes to a kohen, so there are the prohibition of shaving the corner of one's beard or one's hair is not only it doesn't only exist in a general prohibition for all Jews, but there's a special prohibition for Kohanim. And that prohibition is that they can't shave the corners of their beard, and that prohibition is also coupled with a positive commandment, because after it says Ufas zikanam lo yigalehu, it says Kedoshim yuyu lelo kehem, that they should be holy to their God. So as a result, that's why we have here now both a positive commandment and a negative commandment, and that's why we're talking about Kohanim and not regular Jews, because the regular Jew has only a negative commandment. The Kohanim have both a positive and a negative commandment. So Yachol, I might have thought of Kohen Mitzorah Cain, that I might have thought that because there's both a positive and a negative commandment associated with shaving a Kohen, I might have thought that a Mitzorah who's a Kohen would not, in fact, shave his entire head. So Talmud Lomer Zikano, that is why it specifically tells us that a Mitzorah needs to shave his beard, because even a Kohen who's a Mitzorah needs to shave off all of his hair. Okay, well now 1 second, let's go in the other direction. Well, 1 second, according to the author of the second brisa, who says that Rosho, the reason that it says Rosho in the pasuk by Mitzorah is to tell us it overrides both a Nazir situation. So where there's both a positive and a negative commandment that prohibits the person from shaving his beard. Why doesn't he just learn from Zikano, learn from the situation of the beard of a Kohen, that we would also apply the same principle to a Mitzorah, so to a Nazir. So utamech, well, 1 second. The Kaimalan Ba'alma. Well, 1 second. Are you saying that we are trying to establish this rule generally, this rule of a positive commandment overrides a positive and a negative commandment? As we turn to Nunchet Amabet, the low ase, but 1 second. If we have a general rule, the Kaimalan Ba'alma, we have a general rule, the low ase. In general, a positive commandment does not override a positive and a negative commandment. That's why, for example, a positive commandment to do anything on Shabbos will not override the positive negative commandments associated with violating Shabbos. So Leilev Mikoin Dedachi. Well, 1 second. So why don't we learn out a general rule for all of the entire Torah from this Kohen? Elami Kohen lo yalfinan. The reason that we can't learn from a Kohen to the entire to the entire Torah is the same reason that you can't learn from the Kohen to the case of Nazir. Because a Kohen is a unique situation. It does not have the opportunity to apply to everyone. And so Nazir Mekohen Nami Lo Yalef Shekain Lav She'ein Shav B'Kol. So you can't learn from Nazir to Kohen because that also is not a Kohen is not a you can't learn from Kohen to Nazir because the Kohen prohibition does not apply to everybody. Unlike the Nazir, now you might say, well, 1 second, a Nazir doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies to a Nazir. But unlike a Kohen, everybody can become a Nazir. And so a Nazir prohibition is considered a prohibition that applies to everyone. Well, 1 second, Uman demakim lahai l'rosho b'nazir. Well, 1 second, according to the one who says that you need Rosho to tell us that a Mitzorah who's a Nazir shaves his head, despite the fact that doing so would violate both a positive and a negative commandment. So lama li zikano, why bother telling me about the law of a Kohen? Let's just learn it all from a Nazir. So no, we need it for the following principle. We can yes, maybe we can learn, at least at the moment, we might say we could learn Rosho, we can learn a Kohen from a Nazir, but we need Rosho to tell us something. We need Zikano to tell us something else. Zikano matal malomer. We have another brisa that says, "What do you learn from the word Zikano?" Because the Torah says that you can't shave the corner of the head. Yachol av kohen mitzorachin. I might have thought that similarly a kohen has that requirement. Talmulomer zikano. That's why it says zikano. Now uminolam v'debitar. And how do I know that you need to use a razor? Titania, because we have again the brisa. It says ufaz zikanam lo yigalechu, that you cannot shave the corner of their heads. Yachol af gilcho b'misparayim yehei chayav. I might have thought that when a Kohen is prohibited to shave the corner of his head, it doesn't make a difference how he shaves his head, whether he shaves his head with a straight razor or with scissors. So Talmud Lomer below Sashrit. Well, we have the connection between the prohibition by a regular Jew, which it says lo sashchit, and a Kohen where it says ufasakanam lo yigalechu, and we're going to connect the two prohibitions. That just like when it says, so since it says lo sashchit with respect to a regular Jew, so lo sashchit yachol liktan b'malkeit uvar hitnei chayiv. Maybe when it comes to destruction, if you take off your hair with various kinds of straight edges that are not razors, or if you take or use tweezers or something else like that, maybe you should be liable. So Talmud Lomer ufazikanam lo yigalechu. You got to engage in shaving. So basically, the two psukim by Kohen and by the regular Jew tell us you need to have a shaving which is a destruction. And what kind of shaving is that? Omer zetar. That's using a razor. And so the point is we need zikano, according to the author of the second brisa, who says that Rosho teaches us about Nazir. So maybe we can learn Kohen from Nazir, and we'll still need Zikano, because Zikano is going to tell us that that when it comes to the prohibition associated with shaving the corners of one's head, that prohibition is only with a razor. So now the Gemara asks, Uman demapik lehai rosho lulav greda. So in second, now back to the person who learns from the first brisa that he learns that only it applies to a negative commandment alone, and doesn't of the regular Jew that can't shave the corner of his head. So why not lamali lemichtav rosho v'lamali lemichtav zakano? Why do I need both rosho and zakano? Now, according to this person, according to the first brisa, we've seen we need rosho to tell us that it covers that a positive commandment overrides just a simple negative commandment, and we need zikano to tell us that it overrides a positive and a negative commandment. But the Gemara is now asking, mashma lemidche lav greda umashma lemidche lo sasevase. Why not say that when we say rosho, it means any Jew? And so obviously, even a Kohen should be there for covered. And hilkach shakol hu v'yavo shnehem. And therefore, you should be covered by both of them. And so let's take a look in the Rush here, where it explains this nicely. This is the Rush. It's the second Rush on the daf. It is right opposite the Tosos Uluman Demapik Rosho Lulav Greda Lamali. So again, the Rush says Umanda Oki Rosho Lulav Greda Lamali Lemichtav Rosho Vilamali Lemichtav Zikano. So the Gemara, the Rush explains, Lichtav Zikano. Let the Torah just write about the beard. Demashma Bain B'Yisrael, that it wouldn't make a difference whether we're talking about a Yisrael, De'ika Lav Greda, that has just a simple lav, Bain B'Kohen, or whether you have a Kohen, De'ika Lav V'aseh. Vilishtok mirosho. Why did it need to use the word rosho at all? Let the Torah just write zikano. Zikano would tell us about the Kohen. And given the fact that we know that a Kohen would be allowed to shave, well, then certainly a Yisrael would be allowed to shave. So why do I need to tell us both situations? Well, Kohen min Nazir lo yalef. Well, the bottom line is that you can't learn from a Kohen, the rule of a Kohen, from the rule of a Nazir. Shekain yeshnu b'she'ela, because a Nazir has the ability to undo his vow, which a Kohen, of course, cannot. A Kohen can't become a non-Kohen. So Nazir m'Kohen lo yalef, and similarly, you can't learn Nazir from Kohen. Shekain lav she'eno shava b'kol, because a Kohen is not something that applies to everything. So uva alma lo yalfina minayu, and so as a result, we can't learn from them all of the commandments. So mishum de'ika lemifra keda amran. And so as a result, the bottom line is that we see that we cannot learn from Kohen to Nazir or Nazir to Kohen, and therefore we need to say both Rosho and Zikano in order for us to say that not only are you allowed to shave a regular Jew, but you can also shave a Kohen, and you can also shave a Nazir. And so we need all of the different approaches in order to be able to make sure that all the different situations are covered. And so in the end, although we've learned from different sources the different prohibitions, the bottom line is that everyone ends up agreeing that shaving one's entire head is covered by the prohibition of not shaving the corners of one's head, and so is not allowed to be done ordinarily. But it can be done in the context of a Metzora or a Nazir at the end of the Nazirut period, or at the end of the Metzora time frame. So in all those situations, you'd be allowed to shave, but in general, one would not be allowed to shave one's entire head. So today we ended up focusing on the issue of a Metzora shaving, despite the shaving being prohibited, whether for a Kohen, a Yisrael, or a Nazir, due to their respective prohibitions of shaving a razor. But now we're going to look into and delve into another reason that might prevent men from shaving all of their hair. Specifically, we have a prohibition of men wearing women's clothes. You're not allowed to wear women's clothes, and that prohibition is not limited to just clothing, but rather to the extent that there are certain activities that are generally done by women and not by men, or vice versa. So then the other gender is not supposed to engage in those activities. And that would potentially include hair removal. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to address the question similar to what we saw with respect to shaving one's entire head, to say, does the removal of hair on your entire body, is that going to cause is this also another prohibition that would exist generally, but in the special case of Metzora, because a Metzora has to shave all the hair of their body, that's why they're allowed to do it. But a general man would not be allowed to shave all the hair on his body. And so that is what we're going to be discussing for the answer to that question of whether or not this violation would preclude shaving off all of a man's body hair. That you're going for the answer to that, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. I wish you a wonderful, wonderful day, and looking forward to continue to learning.
Well, one second. So
Sure.
if we wear tzitzis, so we're actually allowed to wear a pair of tzitzis that has wool and linen if
Correct.
one is on the garment and the other are on the strings.
Correct. That is correct. That is correct. That's absolutely correct. The interesting question that your question makes me think about is what happens if you have a wool and linen garment that's combined wool and linen. Are you allowed to you wear that also in the context of with tzitzis that are either made of some kind of combination of wool and linen, etc. I think that the answer should still be yes, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But the bottom line is that specifically the concept that we say that a prohibition that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment, that general rule is, as we saw in our Gemara, is either learned from specifically tzitzis, or is learned from the Mitzorah situation. But either way, when it comes to a regular Yisrael, and when it comes to that principle of a positive commandment overriding a negative commandment, that applies more broadly than just in these particular situations, but we say it applies across the board whenever we have a positive commandment. The question is, of course, like, what are the scopes of it? Because we also, of course, have the concept of ein mitzvah ba be'avera, that we don't do a mitzvah through a negative commandment. So you can't steal a lulav. Well, why don't we say it's a positive commandment of shaking the lulav overrides the negative commandment of stealing? Well, in general, those two things don't have to happen together, and they aren't specifically tied one to the other. You don't have to violate one in order to do the other. But in any event, that it raises a very, very interesting and complicated issue of when do we say this concept of a positive commandment overriding a negative commandment. But the answer to your simple question is absolutely, you are allowed to wear a wool garment and linen tzitzis, or vice versa.
Okay, have a good Shabbos, and I guess tomorrow I'll tune to Rabbi Stefanski or one of the other online, because since the Bayit does it on Shabbos.
No. Isn't today Wednesday?
Today's Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday. We have Thursday and Friday. Yeah, we have Thursday and Friday. I wish it were Friday.
I'm sorry.
And it feels a little like
what am I thinking?
It feels a little like an Erev Shabbos, because tomorrow, of course, is Rosh Chodesh. So God willing, I wish everybody a good Chodesh, and will, God willing, continue same bright time, same bright channel. Same time, same channel. God willing, tomorrow, 7:45. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. All right. Have a wonderful day.
I'm going up downstairs. I'm at down.
Okay.